If you're looking to mount up those larger wheels and tires and need a solid kit that's going to get the job done, this ReadyLift 3.5-inch SST suspension lift kit will be a great pick for all 2021 and newer four-wheel drive F-150s, excluding the Raptor and the Tremor models. Now this kit will be a great addition to your truck if you're looking for an easy way to gain some better performance for your F-150, whether that's more ground clearance or fitting a bigger tire for better capability off-road. This will also be a great pick if you're looking to correct the factory rake, creating a more defined stance and leveling out the appearance to the truck. This kit will feature 3.5 inches of lift for the front and 1.25 inch spacers for the rear, gaining that additional ground clearance and leveling out the stance if you're not in need of the additional rake for towing. This will also raise the nose and the rear end, allowing you to get over obstacles a little bit easier and fit a larger tire comfortably inside the wheel well. Now ReadyLift does state that this will fit up to a 295/60R20 with a positive 18mm offset or a 35x12.5 with a wheel that has 0mm of offset with minimal plastic trimming, so I would just keep that in mind. The kit will also come with control arms that will accommodate for that additional angle change and also preload spacers to maintain good yet responsive drivability. The front strut spacers, the preload spacers, and the shock extensions will be made of a billet aluminum material, being incredibly strong. Now the rear lift blocks will be made of a fabricated steel, and you can ensure that these will hold up for the long run, especially with the zinc plated hardware. Now, I would like to mention that the front strut spacers will measure out to roughly 1.5 inches. However, the suspension geometry combined with the spring compression will achieve that 3.5 inches of lift in the front. The rear blocks will be true to size because they are mounted up to a solid axle. Now getting into the control arms, these are going to be made of a steel tube construction, being a lot more durable than the factory ones. They're also going to come with a pretty heavy duty ball joint that you will be able to grease and maintenance for the lifetime of the control arm. Now, these are also just going to kind of flatten out that angle and give you the best drivability when it comes to correcting those angles with the addition of the 3.5 inches of lift in the front. Not to mention, the kit will come with everything that you need in order to get this installed on your truck with no drilling or modification required. When it comes to lift kits, this will be more on the affordable side when it comes to size, coming in at roughly $1,000. When shopping around for lift kits, usually kind of what you see is that the more components that the lift comes with usually means that the pricier that they will be. Now this kit will be right in the middle, being pretty inclusive, but it's not going to include every single bell and whistle like the more expensive choices like complete struts, shocks, or coilover setups. Then on the other hand, some less expensive solutions may not come with all the correcting components that you see here, like the shock extensions or the control arms, making this a great choice if you're looking for a quality yet middle of the road lift that's not going to completely break the bank. When it comes to install, this will be a 2 out of 3 wrenches on the difficulty meter. You will need a little bit of mechanical know-how in order to tackle this job, and it'll probably take you about 6 hours to get the job done. At this point, we can head over to the shop and we can show you a full breakdown of the install and what it looks like step by step. So that's gonna wrap it up for me. Let's go ahead and get into it.
Tools required for this install include a 1/2 inch impact gun, a 3/8 impact gun, a 1/2 inch air gun, a pry bar, a bungee cord, 18, 19, and 27 millimeter wrenches, 14, 15, and 21 millimeter ratcheting wrenches, a hammer, a clip remover tool, a 10, 14, 15, 18, 19, and 21 millimeter sockets, a couple extensions, 3/8 and 1/2 inch swivel adapter, as well as some pole jacks. What's up guys? Today we're going to be installing a lift kit on our F-150. So our first step is to remove our bracket that's holding our brake lines in, as well as our sway bar end link. Now the nut on our sway bar end link is going to be a 21 millimeter, and our bolt holding our bracket to our knuckle is going to be a 10 millimeter. So now we can grab a 10 millimeter socket to remove the bolt holding our brake line bracket into place. And we'll move our bracket off to the side and throw our bolt back there so that we don't lose it. And then we can grab our 21 millimeter socket to disconnect our sway bar end link. And then we can pop our end link out of our knuckle, throw our nut back on there so that we don't lose it. Now we can come over to the other side and disconnect our tie rod. We have a 21 millimeter nut here. So I'll grab a 21 millimeter socket to remove this nut. And then we can pop out our tie rod and we'll throw our nut back on so that we don't lose that. Next, we can come underneath of our lower control arm and remove our two 18mm nuts at the bottom of our strut. So we'll grab an 18mm socket to pop these off. And we will be reusing these nuts, so make sure you keep them in a safe place. Next, we can remove the clips that are holding our lines in up here. So we'll grab a clip remover tool, get behind there, and then we'll remove our two up here by the upper control arm. So now coming up to the top of our strut here, we can loosen up our three 15mm nuts. We're not going to remove them quite yet until we're ready to remove our strut. And I'm using a 15mm ratcheting wrench for these three. So our next step is to drop our lower control arm from the pivot points on the frame. Now we have two bolts, one on each side. That'll be 21mm, and then two 27mm nuts. Again, one on each side. I've got a couple pole jacks here just to apply some upward pressure to our lower control arm. That way, once we get our nuts off, we can pull our bolts out really easy. And then we can drop our lower control arm and work on getting our strut removed. So now we can grab a 21mm socket for our bolt side and a 27mm wrench on our nut side and remove our nut. And then once we have both of our bolts removed, we can remove our pole jacks. And then we can drop our lower control arm. And that'll separate our lower control arm from our lower strut mounts. So now we can go back to the top of our strut and finish removing our nuts. Now two of them should be pretty loose, and only one should be really supporting the weight of it at this point. Now once we have our strut removed, we can come back underneath the truck and we're gonna lift our lower control arm back up into place and thread our bolts back through. Then we'll just put our nuts, just a couple threads on each side. This way, this will hold the lower control arm into place while we start to remove our upper control arm. So now we can come back up to the top of our knuckle and disconnect our upper control arm ball joint. This is going to be an 18mm nut. I've got an 18mm socket that we can remove this with. And then with our nut still threaded on a few threads, we can tap the side of the knuckle to pop the knuckle out from the upper control arm ball joint. And then once we get that pop, we can finish removing our nut. I've got the bottom of our knuckle supported with a pole jack. And then we can just finish popping our upper control arm out. So next we can remove our upper control arm. Now we have two bolts on the inside of our strut tower that are going to be 18mm. and then we have 2 nuts on the outside that are 21 millimeters. So I'm gonna grab a 21 millimeter wrench for our nut, and an 18 millimeter socket for our bolt. And now we can just finish removing our nuts by hand. And then we can pull our bolts through. And finally, remove our upper control arm. So now our first step is to install our new upper control arm. Now you're gonna wanna make sure you match up your old one to the new one. One of them, our ball joint is offset to the right, and one of them, our ball joint's offset to the left. Now the one with the offset to the right is gonna be for our driver's side. So then we can raise that up into place. We'll put our factory hardware back through, and then we can get a 21 millimeter wrench on our nut side and an 18 millimeter socket on our bolt side to tighten everything down. So now with our upper control arm installed and tightened down, we can reconnect our upper control arm ball joint to the knuckle. So we'll pop our nut off our upper control arm. And then once we have our nut threaded on, we can take our 18 millimeter socket to tighten that up. So our next step is to mount our spacer to our factory strut. Now we have our 3 holes that mount up with our studs. There's only one way that it can go on, so you don't have to worry about getting it sideways. Won't go on that way, won't go on that way. There's only one possible way for it to go on. And then we'll be reinstalling our 3 factory strut nuts onto our factory studs. And then we can take our 15 millimeter socket on an impact gun to tighten these down. And now we're ready to get our strut back into the truck. So now with our upper control arm ball joint reconnected and our strut ready to go back into the truck, we can come back to our lower control arm pivot points and remove our hardware. So now I've got a pry bar here that's wedged between the top of our frame and under the upper control arm. so that we can lift the upper control arm to get the clearance we need to slide our strut through. And then we can grab the nuts that are included in our kit for the top of our strut tower. And we can just install these hand tight for the time being. And now one more thing important to note, I've got a bungee cord here on our tie rod, just so that it pulled it out of the way so I had more room to get our strut in here. Now once we have our nuts at the top of our strut tower installed, we can get our lower studs into our lower control arm. So you might have to push the lower control arm towards the outside of the car a little bit to get everything to line up. But then once we have some stud poking through, we can reinstall our factory nuts. So now we can raise our lower control arm back up to our frame and get our hardware through. Now I've got a pole jack on each side to help me do this. We'll crank up a little bit on each side at a time, keeping it pretty even. And then once we have our opening where we can get our bolt through, we'll put that through. And now on this side, we need to come out towards the outside of the car a little bit. So we'll get a pry bar in here just to help us push forward a little bit. And then once we have our bolts through, we're going to be replacing our nuts. So we won't put them on. We can lower our pole jacks just a little bit now. So now instead of replacing our factory nuts on this end, this kit includes camber adjustment. So we have a plate and then a nut, and as you spin the nut, it'll change the angle of your camber. Now on the back side, there's this little tab that goes into this hole here. So we'll press that into place, and then we can start to thread on our nut. And now once we have the camber adjustment installed on this pivot point, we can do the same thing on the other side of our lower control arm. And then now once we have our camber adjustment installed on both sides, we can grab a 27mm wrench for our nut side and a 21mm socket for our bolt side and tighten these down. So now how you use these nuts is once everything's tight, you can get your wrench on there. And as you turn this to the right, it's going to push our lower control arm out. And if you turn it to the left, it'll pull it back in. Next, we can come to our lower strut bolts and tighten up our nuts. So we'll grab our 18mm socket, zip these down. Next, we can come back up to the top of our strut tower and fully tighten down all of our nuts. Now the nuts that are included in the kit for the top of the spacer studs is a 14mm nut instead of a 15mm nut. So I'll get a 14mm ratcheting wrench to tighten these down. Next, we can reconnect our tie rod to our knuckle. Then we can reinstall our 21mm nut. And we'll tighten that down with a 21mm socket. Now we can go back and reinstall all of the clips on our wires here. So now the last two things we have to do is reconnect our sway bar end link and reconnect our bracket. So I'm going to grab a pry bar so that we can pry down on our sway bar. We'll pop that through, reinstall our 21mm nut, and we'll tighten that up with a 21mm socket. And then we can pop our bracket back into place. Thread in our 10mm bolt, and then tighten that down with a 10mm socket. And then once you're done with this side, you can repeat that same process on the other side. So now moving on to the rear, we have to drop our axle a little bit to get our factory block spacer out and put in our new one. So the first step to doing that is to remove our shocks. Up top, we have a 15mm bolt with a nut with a tab on the back. So we don't need to get a wrench on the back side, but on our bottom mount, we have a 15mm bolt with a 18mm nut that we have to remove to get our shock out. So now I've got a pole jack on the axle just to give it some support while we start on bolting everything. So we'll start with our lower shock mount. Once again, we have an 18mm nut and a 15mm bolt. Now at the top, we can grab a 15mm socket to remove our bolt. We have this tab here that's going to lock it in place. Once we start removing this, the tab will flip to the other side, lock against the metal, so we don't need to get a wrench on the back side. So our next step is to swap out our block spacer. So to do that, we have 4 21mm nuts here that we have to remove. Make sure you have your axle supported, and then we can take out our old block and install our new one. And then we have new U-bolts that'll go up top and new nuts on the bottom as well. So now with our axle supported by a pole jack, we can remove our 4 21mm nuts. We'll do this with a 21mm socket on an impact gun. And then once we have those removed, we can start to lower our axle with the pole jack until we get enough room to get our block out and get our new one in. And then we'll raise it back up, put in our hardware, and tighten it all up. So now with our nuts removed, we can start to lower down our axle until we can get our spacer out. And then we can remove our factory U-bolts. Then we still need to come down a little more to fit our new spacer in there. And we can start going back up, close the gap, making sure everything lines up properly. So now once we have our spacer lined up with our top and our bottom holes, we can start to put our U-bolts in, get our bracket on the bottom, and start tightening everything up. Now you might have a little gap on the top or bottom where your holes haven't properly seated yet, but once we start tightening everything down, it'll take care of that. So we'll grab those new U-bolts that were included in the kit, slide them down. And then we can reinstall our factory bracket. And we'll start installing our new 19mm nuts that are included in our kit. Then we can push our bracket up into place and take a 19mm socket to start tightening down our nuts. And now you can see as our nuts start to get tighter on our bolts, it's pushing everything down into place where it should be. So our next step is to install our shock extension. Now this is going to slide right over the top here, and then we have a bolt. We have a washer for each side and our locking nut. So we'll grab our bolt, throw our washer on there, get everything lined up, thread our bolt through, put another washer on the other side, and then our locking nut. And then we can tighten these down with a 19mm socket and a 19mm wrench. And now we're ready to get this back installed on the truck. So now once we have our shock extension on, we can reinstall it onto the truck, reusing our factory hardware. And we'll put that nut with the tab on the back. And then we'll leave that loose for right now until we get our bottom shock mount in place. Now we can install our shock into our lower mount. Now it's a little farther down now because of our extension, so we're gonna have to push up on the bottom to compress it while we try to get our bolt through. And then we can get our nut on the other side. And then we'll take our 18mm wrench for our nut side, 15mm socket for our bolt side, and tighten that down. So now we can go back up top to our upper shock mount and tighten down our 15mm bolt. Once again, the nut on the back side has a tab. It's gonna flip to this side when we go to tighten it to lock it in place so we don't have to get a wrench on that side. And then once we're done with this side, we can repeat that same process on the other side. So that'll wrap up this review and install of the ReadyLift 3.5-inch SST suspension lift kit for your 2021 and newer four-wheel drive F-150. Thank you for watching, and for all things F-150, keep it right here at AmericanTrucks.com.